We talked about saturated fat before. We talked about cholesterol related to heart disease. But let's talk about dietary cholesterol, which often goes hand in hand with the saturated fat piece. And again, for people that are heading towards what we're recommending here today, from maybe more of a plant-based diet or higher carb diet, that would be, given the current status of the recommendations to people, that would be a legitimate concern. They would be worried about dietary cholesterol from what they've heard. So, rest their minds, talk about if there's any validity to fear around dietary cholesterol.
Well, first of all, I want to impress upon you how everybody was paranoid of eggs in the 1960s and 70s. I mean, they were like a death food, and there was on the cover of Time magazine of like the 2 egg eyes and the bacon frown, like, do not eat, this diet will kill you. And I spoke to people who worked on the egg nutrition board, which was a trade group, and they were harassed, and it was more like bloody nutrition politics. By the end of the 70s, there had been an analysis done that said there doesn't seem to be any relationship in the amount of the dietary cholesterol that you eat and your blood cholesterol. And that's because it's what we call a homeostatic system. The more you eat, the less you produce, but you can produce it endogenously. So if your body will produce cholesterol, because body is essential in every organ in the body. It's essential for making hormones, especially sex hormones. It's essential for the functioning of the brain. You need cholesterol, and your body needs to be able to produce it if you're not eating it. So even people there was an experiment of a Swiss scientist who ate like 40 eggs a day. This was recently replicated by Nick Norwitz, but it didn't cause his cholesterol to go up. This was known by the late 70s, but the folks invested in demonizing cholesterol were not backing down. So study after study, we can't find a relationship between dietary and blood cholesterol. Finally, in news that nobody's ever heard of because it was never publicized, 2013, in a scientific statement that I stumbled on and just couldn't believe it was there. There's a single word in a table saying relationship between dietary and blood cholesterol, and there's a single word in that box saying insufficient, which they never talked about. They never released to the public. There was not enough evidence, but that was 2013. 2 years later, the American Dietary Guidelines Committee reviews the evidence and also finds insufficient evidence and barely communicates that to the public. They reviewed it again in 2020, I guess trying to find a different result. No relationship found. And again, barely, that news has barely been publicized at all. So, and the dietary guidelines still recommend dietary patterns that tend to be lower in cholesterol. That's all based on epidemiological evidence, which is far weaker than the clinical trial evidence that was reviewed for these decisions. So there are no more recommendations against dietary cholesterol. There aren't. We used to have a 200 milligram cap, or maybe it was 300. But anyway, we used to have a numeric cap. That is gone and has been gone for years. But again, getting back to this problem of why it's so hard to change nutrition guidelines to reflect the science, there is a real, there's no desire or will or interest in flip-flopping on your public, and in changing recommendations. And it just, you lose your public if you admit you've been wrong on something so significant. So I think that's why these changes have not been publicized and people are still confused, unfortunately.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
They ignored the trials showing the low-fat diet didn't work. They ignored the trials showing that replacing saturated fat with unsaturated vegetable oils did not have any effect on reducing heart disease or cardiovascular mortality. And that's the way they arrive at the